Okay, so I'm addressing question number 3, which is Germany, Denmark, and Sweden have recently considered increasing taxes on meat to reduce consumption, improve health, and encourage sustainable diets. In your view, does this policy innovation have the characteristics of a policy with low or high diffusability? Why? In your response, make sure to spread the policy, sorry, to consider the spread of the policy to both the United States and to other countries. Okay, so first I'm going to start with what the question is really asking. So what I think the question is really addressing is, should we as a society take measures to reduce our meat consumption? Which is honestly a very fair and crucial question to be asking, given the long-term effects of methane gas emissions on the environment that we know happen from production of meat, especially beef. And so it looks like it could be something that lasts long term. This question is also addressing things that are beyond our horizon, and the actual concept at question is not necessarily foreign, as we've seen it with things like cigarettes and alcohol, and we've seen it thrown around in a lot of different countries with respect to carbon gas emissions, placing a tax on carbon. Um, Beyond that, beyond just the environment, as the question kind of alludes to, it's also a public health concern that people are over consuming meat, as it's really, really not good for individual health. So what's my answer to the question? I think that in those specific countries, there will be low diffusability and that it might and probably will yield results. Um, I think it won't eliminate intake, but it might reduce intake of meat, and then I think methane gas emissions that are already very dangerous in the environment will likely go down. The reason that I think in these specific countries that'll help is because they tend to be very homogenous, whereas a country like the United States is very heterogeneous. As mentioned prior, the cows produce more methane when they are farmed for meat, and if we increase that, then it'll have a impact on the industry, the farming industry, whereby there will be less production of beef and of meat, which will then help everything out. However, it is important to note that increasing the price will impact the market in ways. And although I justify my claim by saying that this is thinking long term, it's good for health, it's good for the environment, and it makes sense because of reducing emissions of methane, alternative positions may say that this actually has high diffusability and that prices going up can have an economic impact that would be felt in a very negative way on the industry. People could lose their jobs. Strain could be placed unnecessarily on farmers who farm crops, as the demand will shift likely from meat production to crop production. Now, we don't know exactly what that can mean, but because it messes with the overall economy, um, it's very likely that people will get frustrated, people will lose their jobs, um, and people will want their meat. So there could be a little, not civil unrest, that's a little extreme, but there could be definitely some disagreements there. So the taxes may not hold up for long because of that. They also may not hold up long because the long-term environmental impact may not be seen as worth it to overrule the short-term economic deficit of placing a tax on that. So in considering the spread of the policy to the United States, I think that that point I was just making is especially true to the United States. I think that our country goes up in arms about every little thing, and that people not getting their meat would be seen as, their freedoms and their liberties being infringed upon, which, although it's not necessarily true, is definitely a perception that Americans will have. I also think that, in states like Texas, you might really see in other southern states that are reliant on cattle farming, you will definitely see an economic impact that would leave the American people up in arms. The other thing is that logically, a policy like this would just never happen in the United States because if we can't even agree to reduce things like fracking or carbon gas emissions, there's no way that people will reduce their consumption of red meat or meat in general. So my conclusion with the U.S. and the spread of the policy of the U.S. is that the policy will likely either not last long or not reduce the impact of methane emissions enough to justify it being in place. That being, you know, the people will not necessarily accept it. So, yeah,